Well, let's dig into some more design today. And today we're going to be talking about versus mode. Now, apologies if I repeat myself because this is like the third time I've had some technical problems recording this. So I may be repeating myself, and get lost in it. So for those who don't know, versus mode is our competitive mode of both Left 4 Dead and the Anacrusis. Now, some other games have the same kind of asymmetrical competitive mode, but I think they make a fundamental mistake. And the mistake number one is, in both the Anacrusis and Left 4 Dead, it's the survivors are still playing the co-op, right? So you have the survivor side, and then you have the aliens or the zombies. And the aliens and zombies have all these kind of special abilities, and the survivors are pretty much how they work. And because of that, you know what the survivors are trying to do. So as this other side, you're going to be evil. You're going to be essentially sanctioned griefing. You're going to cause somebody else pain. And I hate to say this, but I think the joy of doing that in this kind of setting is the fun. It is what makes people laugh. It's what makes people get excited. And so when other games turn this into a sport or some kind of super competitive, it loses some of that nature to it. And it just doesn't work as well. So that's how like Left 4 Dead and Anacrusis are similar in versus mode at a top level. But at a fundamental level beneath that, they're radically different. So now Left 4 Dead's versus comes from, that's how you just used to play the game. When I first started playing, the very first builds, you played 4 humans, 4 aliens, or 4 zombies. And you always were fighting there, but you wouldn't wipe out a team early on, ever. Like, you would just wear them down. And the expectation was you would wear them down by the finale, you might be able to get them. Well, that's kind of frustrating as a zombie, because you're like not being that effective, and that slow wearing down is fun, but it's not that good feeling of like, hey, I just wiped the team. So we changed that somewhere, in the co-op and the versus game, it switches sides. It's like level to level. You can wipe and you just reset back to that level. And so then the stakes were kind of nerfed a little, and you could be a little bit more deadly. But still, we always made it as its roots was the survivors should survive. The problem there is that kind of adds some toxicity into the game, because if one person just goes off the golden path just a little bit and they die, well, they're a jerk. They're an idiot. They're the reason why your team's losing. You're never going to win, because everybody always gets all 4 players all the way through. And if one of them doesn't, now we're going to lose. We should just quit. And I saw that a lot happening in the Left 4 Dead community, and I wanted to change that. So for the Anacrusis, the aliens should win. You should die as a survivor. And it should be rare that you come through as a survivor. It should be even rarer that all 4 of you come through. And I think we're pretty successful that way. And now, we're successful in some ways that I think people may not be aware of, and sometimes it makes me laugh when I play with people in versus, because they'll tell me how the game works, and I have to explain to them, no, I made the game, that's not how it works. So one of them is, in Left 4 Dead, you could move ahead, and you could essentially block spawn by poisoning the cells. Like, think of it like the entire map is just nothing but a grid. And as a survivor, if you saw one of those grid marks, we couldn't spawn anything there anymore. And so players would split up, and someone would run ahead, and it would just stop all the spawns. And then it just became this very weird kind of gaminess to it. In the Anacrusis, we don't do that. We don't poison those cells, so that we can still do spawning there. Now, we're not going to do spawning in front of you, but we are going to do spawning closer to you. And we're going to do spawning even if somebody else is far from you. So somebody could be far ahead, and somebody can be in the back, and that person in the back is still going to pay the price. Because now one of the ways you make the game harder is just more time in the level. For every second you're in the level's a little harder. It's more likely to kill you. So having things come from everywhere means the people in the back just can't, keep pushing ahead. They may have to be dealing with what's behind them. And on top of that, what we would see in Left 4 Dead is the first person would get jumped because we were spawning up in front because we're trying to slow the players down. Well, the problem is let's say you hunter jump the first person, the second person's right behind them, they just knock them off. The grabber or the smoker just doesn't pull you that far in Left 4 Dead, right? It has its roots in that it used to pull you into the smoke cloud, the damage, and all this other stuff. In Anacrusis, the grabber pulls you. And then what you want to actually do is be behind them as a grabber, and you pull them back, and you can pull them really far, and then they all have to come running back, and that slows them down. That makes them, repeat that same route again. And remember, they haven't poisoned that route, so things can spawn there. It makes the game significantly harder, But the other thing the grabber does is in Left 4 Dead, you would ledge grab, right? So if you pulled somebody off a ledge, they would ledge grab, and you could rescue them. And it was like, in co-op it makes sense, in versus a little less sense. In Anacrusis, it's deadly. It could pull you all the way off into your death or just down some flights of stairs that people have to go run down and get you. And it changes the complexity of how you use the grabber and how people think about the grabber. When you hear the grabber now get called out, you're on edge. If you're going up, like in the mall, you are on edge that you're going to get pulled off. And so you have to be aware of that. And so, that comes in play into that. But all of that comes from that we're not poisoning those cells. And then the other thing is just how the creatures work together. In Left 4 Dead, you could pair up and kind of really cover a lot of ground. But again, you're going the same way, but it was more if somebody was lagging behind because they were hurt or whatnot, you could do that. We broke that in the Anacrusis in the sense of the spawner is one of the most powerful creatures in the world, in our world, not in the world, But what it does is in co-op, it drives you nuts because it hides and it drops off these eggs, and these eggs come at you and then they start shooting at you and they do damage. And so the goal for it in co-op is to frustrate you enough to run out of the safety of your friends to go kill it, like to actively decide to leave your group. And while it does that some in versus mode, the other thing it does is if you're down or if you're hurt or if you're grabbed, you can spawn the eggs by that person and it'll attack that down person or that grabbed person, which means you need to go rescue that person. But it also means if you're trying to rescue that person, you're getting hit by those things and you really need a third person there to cover you. And then remember the gooper, unlike the hunter, you can free somebody from being goop, but you haven't killed the gooper. So the gooper's still out there and they're still active and they can still take you out. And so you have to be aware of that. And then that comes to the one other really big change. Now, this was a philosophical idea that I've changed my mind on. So in Left 4 Dead, the creatures in co-op behave the same way the creatures do in versus. And that's on purpose because originally Left 4 Dead was a really hard game and we were worried about people understanding it. And we wanted to let people learn in co-op and come to versus. For the Anacrusis, we think people know how to play these games better, and so we can actually introduce some new stuff in versus. And so one of the things we do in versus is the goopers changed. And the big change there is he can do a happy dance. So this means you can goop some people, and when someone comes to rescue them, if you're up high, you can drop down on them and you do this little dance. It takes a few seconds, and then you explode and you cover everybody with goo. And especially if there's fire around and other stuff, you can hurt them. It also does damage. So we originally, in Left 4 Dead, we explored this with the boomer, who would cover you in bile and kind of blind you. But you're still active, but it would do damage on the explosion. We found that being really griefy because people would get mad if their friend shot the boomer and then they went down because they got the damage. Where here, it's the gooper controlling when they explode, and that feels good. Like, that's not your fault. Instead, the fault is, hey, we didn't shoot them in time. And so when you do shoot them in time, then that feels good. And so that kind of alleviates that kind of pain space for the player and becomes a really cool character. And now the other one we changed was the Brute. In co-op, the Brute is designed that you need to stay together and all four of you need to shoot at the Brute, because if all four of you shoot at the Brute, you can take him down. If you're one-on-one with him, he has too much health, he's going to kill you. In versus mode, he's got a lot less health, but he's still tough. So one-on-one, you still don't want to do that. But he also has the ability to change his direction a lot more. And he can do shorter little bursts. And so that gives him a lot more flexibility, and that gives then the player a lot more flexibility of how they want to approach and break up the team. And so what you really want to do is you grab somebody really far with the grabber, you goo between the other team and the person you grabbed, and as they're slowly walking over there to free the person grabbed, you come in there with the Brute and you smash them, right? And then the fourth person's spawning up the spawner eggs and they're taking that, and then they're hurting everyone who's down, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff we do like that works really well together. And then on the survivor side, we do remove some of the elements of what you have because we found it wasn't fun. Like, we didn't have the ability to express what was happening to the survivor side so that the aliens understood. And so then it became feeling like really unfair that you died instantly or that you couldn't kill the person that you thought you could kill. So we've removed those. We've slowly worked a couple back in just because we've kind of decided how they would be approached and how people play. Because, all of this stuff, when you do it, you can have these theories in your head, but you have to implement them. You've got to iterate on them. You've got to play them, and you have to not just play them with your team. You've got to play them with your whole, your community. And we keep doing that. We played it all through the weekend. They're playing tonight. We just keep playing and keep iterating and making it better and better this way. And the other thing, though, that's a really big difference from Left 4 Dead and the Anacrusis is we allow single player versus. So you can play just against the bots. And this is really fun. Now we have the survivor bots set to run like hell because that's the hardest thing to stop. And so as the alien, you can actually set it where you have no spawn time and you can just keep, as soon as you die, you can spawn. It's a really good chance to play around with the mode without the pressure of being with other people or test things or try things or learn how to play it. We call it the tutorial mode, but really it's a single player. And we also scaled it down. So if you're playing 2v2 or 1v1 in this mode, you spawn quicker. Like, we just account for all of that so that it's a lot more fun playing this mode with not just 4v4, but whatever set of players that you have for it. And so for people who haven't played it, I would love for you to play it. Give us some feedback, see what you think about it, see if we've hit that mark. You know, I think for all of these kind of games, what you learn is you need to adjust. You need to change as the meta changes, right? So as players get better at playing it, we need to adapt and we need to be always looking at it. Because I'll say one of the things and why people don't do a versus mode like this is simple. You have to build the maps this way as well. So you have to have spaces for people to spawn, to hide, to do all of these things. And that's a lot of work. There's a lot of work you always have to be thinking about. And so that is something we've done through all of our maps. They're all working really well this way. It's really fun to play. The modders now have an understanding that this is something they have to account for and appreciate. So I think we're in a really good place. And I say this with all humility of having worked on Left 4 Dead as well, is this is my favorite version of Versus, by far. We've taken everything we learned from Left 4 Dead and we've brought it into this mode. So again, play it, check it out, let me know. We're launching December 5th. I'd love to hear what you have to say or any other questions you have about setting up this kind of asymmetric versus mode. Could be about the Anacrusis or Left 4 Dead.